It's not global warming. It is global weirding. In Valentine's Day weekend of 2021, there was this freak ice event that barreled across Texas. And for like 9 or 11 days, I mean, Texas is supposed to be like hot, right? And he didn't get fruit because of a deep freeze. That's weird. The people in the wine and spirits industries are some of the most forward-thinking, realistic, but optimistic people. And I think that the wine world is going to help lead the way into a future where we learn we're not changing climate change, but how to survive it, how to make the most of the current situation that we find ourselves in, and take heart in that.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 203. As a wine lover, what can we do to help mitigate the impact of climate change? Why do many experts consider the phrase global warming a big marketing mistake? And how is climate change pushing the boundaries of where great wine comes from? You'll hear those tips and stories in part 2 of my chat with Brian Freedman, who has just published his first book, Crushed: How a Changing Climate is Altering the Way We Drink. You don't need to have listened to part 1 from last week first, but I hope you'll go back if you missed it after you finish this one. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show with the continuing saga of publishing my new wine memoir, Wine Witch on Fire: Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much. In addition to friends and family, several lawyers also reviewed my manuscript line by line to ensure there was no cause for concern. My memoir explores several legal issues, including defamation and copyright. Experts in these areas gave me great insight into the law as well as to specific approaches and remedies to avoid any issues. Memoir is a personal narrative, but it also involves others to tell the story. So I was mindful of keeping the perspective my own with phrases like, in my opinion, especially when others may differ. They're entitled to their own opinions, as well as to writing their own memoir to express them. But beyond this, instead of, say, characterizing someone's actions or speech, I shared how I felt. For example, I would change the sentence, "He talked about me like I was a wicked witch," to, "I felt like a wicked witch when I heard him talk about me." It's a subtle change, but it makes the revised sentence indisputable. By the way, these examples aren't actually in the book. You'll have to read it to find out which ones are. I also avoided interpreting the intentions of others or of reading their minds, which of course is impossible, even though we often do it in our everyday lives. I took out any sweeping generalizations and stuck to facts and events that were documented. Concrete details are always more interesting anyway. Compare the statement, "She was always nagging me," with, "This was the 4th time today she reminded me to brush my hair." I'll share more of these legal beagle tips next week. Here's a review from Gail Herndon, a beta reader from Washington, D.C. What a memoir. Natalie tells her story with great vulnerability and brutal honesty, from her marriage, divorce, and foray into dating and finding love again, as well as the unrelenting work drama that unfolds simultaneously and somewhat mysteriously in the wine world. Highly educated and accomplished before her enterprise into wine writing, her interactions with misogynistic colleagues are simply shocking and left my mouth agape. Yet these stories are sadly relatable, Natalie's humor and grace are evident throughout and no doubt contributed to her addressing her attackers with poise. Spoiler alert, she does come out all the stronger and wiser. Big cheers to supporting women in wine. Natalie's story is well worth a read. 5 stars. Thank you, Gail. I've posted a link to a blog post called Diary of a Book Launch in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/203. This is where I share more behind the scenes stories about the journey of taking this memoir from idea to publication. If you want a more intimate insider seat beside me on this journey, please let me know that you'd like to become a beta reader and get a sneak peek at this manuscript. Email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. Okay, on with the show. There's something that surprised you when you were researching or writing the book, something someone said or something you discovered that you didn't know before?
Yeah, two things. The first one was, and most of the book does focus on wine, but I do have a chapter that focuses on primarily American whiskey, but it touches on gin as well to a certain extent. What surprised me with the world of spirits was just how much climate change is impacting not just small farms where they're growing, heirloom grains, but also the large commodity operations and how climate change is affecting the production of those grains, the pricing of those grains, how they're being grown. I was talking to one of the master distillers. He was with Sazerac, giant company. They have, lots and lots of brands under their corporate umbrella. And he's, among other projects, in charge of their gin production. He was telling me that because like an ill-timed storm hit somewhere in Asia, Southeast Asia, the year before, and it was like the gravity of the storm was very much likely attributable to climate change, right? He couldn't get certain botanicals that he needed for his gin, and he had to literally scour the planet in order to get those botanicals to make the gin that he needed. And you don't think something like that is going to happen, but it's true. What's the old, if a butterfly flaps its wings in Australia, it can cause a tornado in Kansas,
sure,
right?
Yes.
It's the same thing. If a storm hits at the wrong time and the wrong intensity in Asia, it can affect the gin in your glass in Toronto or in Philadelphia. The other thing that surprised me was that climate change is not affecting the places that you would necessarily expect it to in the predictable ways.
Okay.
We all talk about global warming. And I forget who said it. Someone far smarter than me, so I'm not going to claim it was me. But they said that the big marketing issue that the people who for years have been sounding the alarm, their big marketing issue that they sort of messed up with in the beginning was calling it global warming. Because climate change is doing a whole lot more than making stuff hotter. That's certainly part of it. But I was talking to Julie Culkin, and she is the co-owner of Pedernales Cellars in Texas Hill Country. Fabulous wine coming out of Texas. One of my chapters is on Texas wine. And we were having drinks one night in Texas. And she said, Brian, she said, for me, it's not global warming. It is global weirding.
Yes.
I said, my goodness, you're right.
Yes.
It is global weirding.
Yeah.
And she's right. And it turns out my Texas chapter is about the fact that we were there and we were at the tasting room of Ron Yates. Ron is this fabulous, fabulous producer. He's in the High Plains, he's in Hill Country. And we're looking at the estate vineyard outside the window. And I said, Ron, it's like, you got all your fruit off. This was like last September, October. I said, you got all the fruit. There's no fruit. There's no dropped fruit. Like, that's great. Must have been a good harvest. He said, what harvest? So what are you talking about? Turned out, I don't know if you remember this, Natalie, but there was in Valentine's Day weekend of 2021, there was this freak ice event that barreled across Texas.
Right.
And for like 9 or 11 days, whatever it was, temperatures in Texas, right?
Yes.
Plummeted well below freezing. There were deep freezes. People died, billions of dollars worth of damage. And the vines, because of this freeze in his estate vineyard, because of that, they didn't produce fruit. And the ones that did, they had bud break was so late, it never would have gotten to ripening in time anyway. So we got no fruit off of that estate vineyard. He was able to source from other producers and make wine. But I thought, Texas is supposed to be like hot,
Right.
right? It's Texas. And he didn't get fruit because of a deep freeze. That's weird.
Yes,
I got to tell that story.
it is.
And the other thing that was not a surprise, but it's something that always bears repeating. Natural disasters always harm worst the people who can least afford it, right? We talk about it in the book. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, right? It's got to be 18 years ago at this point, I think. If you had money, and there were plenty of stories and reporting about it at the time and afterwards, people with money were able to leave, go to hotels in higher ground, get out of New Orleans. The people who couldn't afford that, who already inherently lived in places where maybe the infrastructure wasn't as good, they didn't have the opportunity or the option to leave, they were the ones who suffered most. Well, if we look at climate change as one of the biggest natural disasters that just keeps on unfolding year after year, the people who can least afford it are going to be the ones who are most impacted. So I focus on this one producer, Johan Reineke, in South Africa, right? And in South Africa, like it is in so much else of the world, but in South Africa, it's obviously magnified because of the horrible history of apartheid. What happens with climate change? If you have all the money and you own the winery, you own the vineyards and the land, you'll probably be okay. You can ride it out. But what if you're a farm laborer, right?
Right.
What then if climate change really causes a problem? So what Johan does, and like so many other great producers in South Africa, is they're now trying to leverage their work, the land, the wineries that they have, to sort of help, communities that for so long didn't have the opportunity to, and, give people a sense of ownership, of more control over their futures. So there was a lot of surprising, reporting for the book was fascinating and upsetting. But the one thing I learned, and Natalie, I think you're going to be able to agree with me here and vouch for this, the people in the wine and spirits industries are some of the most forward-thinking, realistic but optimistic people. Mm-hmm. And if, I genuinely think that the wine world is going to help lead the way into a future where we learn how to, we're not changing climate change at this point, right? But how to survive it, how to make the most of the current situation that we find ourselves in. And I take heart in that.
They have a generational kind of planning horizon. You have to. If you only have one harvest a year, unlike beer, where you can make multiple beer batches, you have to think long term, and just the capital cost tied up in everything. It's why so many family wineries, make the right decisions. You definitely underscoring and agreeing with you. They have that long-term planning horizon. And also, I've heard certain winemakers describe themselves as pathological optimists. I mean, you have to be. When you just get this one shot, everything rides on it, and then, oh, well, maybe better luck next year if it doesn't work. You have to have that fortitude to keep going in a business like this, where it's so high stakes. So,
yeah, a winemaker once said to me, I'm kind of jealous of chefs because you have a bad night one night in the kitchen, you find yourself in the weeds. That's awful. That really stinks. You got the next night, the one after. As a winemaker in a career, a long career, 45, 50 chances to do your thing.
Yes, exactly.
It's a very different mindset.
It is. It really is. So we should make sure we taste the wines you've got and
Yes.
I've got too. So what one are you starting? Which one are you starting with?
Oh, let's start off. Let's go sort of lighter to richer, right?
Sure.
We'll go in order. So let's start off. I have the Kutch 2016 Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir. What do you have?
I have the Sperling Vineyards from BC Pet Nat. I'm not trying to be trendy, but I just thought may as well try this since we're talking about different wines and influences.
Love a good Pet Nat.
Yeah. Oh, let's see how this one goes. But I'd love to hear what you think of your Kutch Pinot Noir as well.
Well, for me, this is the kind of wine. And look, the world of wine is also full of preconceived notions and misapprehensions. So, so often I'll hear people say, often when I'm overseas, oh, no, I can't drink California wine. Too fruit driven, tastes like there's residual sugar, and all these stereotypes. And my answer is, last I checked, California's giant. So like that entire stretch of land from like Mexico to Oregon.
Yes.
You don't like any of that. because that's interesting. You've tasted it all. How do you have the time? So, for me, this is the kind of wine where, Jamie has this amazing ability to channel the, wait for a pretentious phrase, you ready? The ineffable truth
Ooh,
of a vineyard.
I like that.
Thank you. Thank you. But, he finds a way to translate what the vine is experiencing in its patch of land into the liquid in the glass. And I love the fact that, and I've talked to him about this before, if one vineyard is growing in, gravel that's 100 million years old, and another vineyard has soil that's, 200 million years old and is this kind of composition because a glacier made a right instead of a left at the end of the last ice age. He finds a way to really express those differences from vineyard to vineyard. Now, this is the Sonoma Coast bottling, so this is really a snapshot of the nature of that part of California. And I love that with this wine, I need to hydrate. Give me a second.
Yes, by all means. I'm just
I love that this wine, there is certainly, there's beautiful fruit. We don't want to miss that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there is a floral note. There's the seam of minerality running through it. It's structured, but it's so elegant. It's energetic. To me, this is a delicious Pinot Noir, and it's a delicious Pinot Noir from a very specific and important part of the world. How about you? How's that pet?
I love this. I haven't tasted like lots and lots of pet nats, and I found those I've tasted, a good percentage of them were just very strange, but that's just me. So I'm trying to, of course, as a writer or critic, you try to judge it for what it is. This is absolutely delicious, this Sperling Vineyards pet nat. It's bready and yeasty in a good way. There's good floaty bits and stuffing in there, which I love to see because it's almost got a more textural element to it. But it's just beautiful, like as an aperitif or maybe anything, like a lot of things, like roast chicken, whatever, seafood, be wonderful. But it's from the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia. So it sounds
I
like
love the
we've got
wines
two
coming out
winners.
of the Okanagan Valley.
Yeah. Anne Sperling, who owns this winery in Southbrook in Ontario, is a real leader for biodynamic and organic farming in our country. And she also created the world's first appellation for orange wines.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
that.
So she's got quite a history. She's a rock star, literally. But,
Nice. I'm going to have to get my hands on some of those.
yeah, it's really worth trying. All right. So do you want to go on to your
Sure.
Tabor?
No, so actually today we have Shiloh.
Shiloh. Okay, gotcha.
Shiloh. So Shiloh's another leading producer in Israel.
Okay.
This is the Secret Reserve Petit Verdot 2018. This is interesting. This is from the Judean Hills appellation. And I say it's interesting because, first of all, when I was there, some colleagues and I, we rode all-terrain vehicles through the vineyards. We planted vines. But the amazing thing is we stop at one point and their winemaker, this amazing man named Amichai Lori, we stopped at one point and he says, look over there. So what's over there? It was an ancient stone grape press in the middle of the vineyard that's thousands and thousands of years old.
Wow.
So like they've been growing grapes and making wine in this place where he's growing grapes and making wine for thousands of years, right?
Goodness.
It's amazing to me.
Huh.
This region really highlights the fact, we think of Israel, Middle East, again, around 50% of the country technically can be classified as desert. But Israel also has a long, beautiful Mediterranean coast.
Huh.
It has mountains. There's Yatir is another wonderful producer, and they're growing grapes where there's forests up towards the mountains, right? So there's lots of different terroirs there. The Judean Hills, we're sort of talking between the Mediterranean and Jerusalem. So we're getting some of those Mediterranean influences here. We're having these ancient soils. And this wine for me, this is Petit Verdot, right?
Okay.
This wine for me is... So what I love here is you have that generous purple and blue fruit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's certainly this wonderful sense of concentration here, but it is very driven by terroir. There is a deep core of minerality here on the palate.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sense of spiciness through the finish. It's a wine that has years and years of evolution to come. And for me, this highlights just how much diversity and range is happening within the Israeli wine industry.
Oh, wow. Great.
What's your second?
I have an orange wine. Again, not trying to be trendy, but it's from Trainer Estate here in Ontario. And it's surprising me as well. I haven't tried that one before. This is a great little boutique winery in Ontario, and it's got a real piquant sort of orange clementine. I'm probably influenced by the color, but I still get that orange zest from it. And just, it's dry and refreshing. We've got some stuffing in that one too. So very interesting.
Stuffing is good. That means it's like the monks with bread, right? During fasting seasons.
Yeah.
You can survive on orange wine with floaties alone, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. I love to see unfiltered wine. I always find they just, again, have that nice texture to them as well. But no, fantastic. Yeah. We'll have to link to all of 4 wines in the show notes. So I'll come back to you. You've sent me the names of the wines, but I'll make sure we have links to them as well. Just if people are listening to see if they can get them in their local areas.
Yes. It's worth looking for. And I think one of the things with climate change, and I learned this reporting on the book, is climate change is really shifting where great wine is produced and can and will be produced, right? So I think, those of us in the wine business, we always say, keep an open mind, right? Don't get stuck in that wine rut saying, I only drink such and such a grape from such and such a country or region or appellation. The wine world is huge.
Yes.
And the wine world is fascinating. And climate change is pushing those boundaries, right? One of my chapters in Crushed is about South America. Obviously, Chile and Argentina, 2 very, very different countries, right? So I want to put that out there. I'm not saying it's, South America, Chile and Argentina are exactly the same. Very different. But what's interesting is in both countries, as things are getting warmer and weirder, producers are moving higher up into the Andes, right? The Andes to the east if you're in Chile, to the west if you're in Argentina. I'm doing the map in my head. But they're also moving further south into Patagonia.
Right, where it's colder because it's the other hemisphere.
It's colder.
Yeah.
Yes, and there's regions in Patagonia where 20, 25 years ago, people thought you're not even going to get a decent white wine crop. And now people are producing fabulous Pinot Noir there. So, keep an open mind.
That's true.
That's, I think, this book is not all doom and gloom. Look, clearly, I think we're all seeing that climate change is a very real and pressing problem. But this book also shows that there is hope. And if there are people in any industry who are going to help us see that way forward and navigate that path, it's the folks who are making wine. And I think that's really important to note.
And for us to support them as wine consumers. But I love that because, the book isn't a downer. It's also a message of hope, but it's also a message of opening up your palate and your perceptions to the diversity, to the changing diversity. Like, I love that point that you've made a couple times. Don't just think, I only like Pinot from even the Sonoma coast. Like, it is great Pinot, but guess what? Things are changing. So think maybe there's another region opening up that will give you that kind of taste that you love already, but you just don't realize it because of how things are changing.
Exactly right. Exactly. The world of wine has always been appealing to so many people because it affords you the opportunity to explore, right?
Yes.
And now in a world of climate change, perhaps counterintuitively, it is forcing us to not sort of hunker down in our own little Venice bubble, but to expand what we're tasting and what we're, opening up with lunch or dinner, right? I mean, let's say there's no vintage in a certain place because of frost or because of fire or smoke taint. So you don't have the opportunity to drink that wine from that place that you always loved. Use that as a chance to explore other regions and other producers and to support them. Because supporting the people who are doing the right thing and trying to help find that way forward is more important now than ever. And let's be honest, it can be some of the most delicious homework you can ever possibly do.
Exactly. You can feel good about having something tasty.
Yeah.
And do you have any notions? Is there anything specific about Canada that you foresee happening or that you see happening now? I mean, we've talked a lot about the trends, but is there anything about Canada that you see for wine and climate change?
Yes. Also, yes. Canada, and I've noticed this among American consumers that I speak with. I do a lot of, consumer facing tastings and events as well. And, like you were saying in the beginning with your son, you didn't want to give him at 3 years old a beautiful ice wine and make him think it's liquid candy, right? For a long time, Canadian wine was, if not synonymous with ice wine,
Yes.
it was taking up a great chunk of the bandwidth in the American market, at least among the preponderance of consumers. I find that changing now. And I think the dry red and white wines are every year, they seem to reach a new high, a new level of quality and expressiveness. So I think there's this amazing overlapping. Do you remember Venn diagrams from geometry class as a kid, the circles overlapping? So for me, that Venn diagram of the quality is just getting better and better every year, and it was high to begin with. And also the accessibility. I find that more and more retailers are stocking them on their shelves. Not a huge range yet, but I'm noticing there's more and more. Restaurant wine lists, it just takes one great sommelier to sort of crack open a wine list and start introducing guests to the amazing wines of places like Canada. So I think that Venn diagram overlap is at a very good place right now. So we're seeing more and more of them, and they're better than ever. I do think also because of climate change, in the Southern Hemisphere, like we said, you get further south into Patagonia and you're able to grow wine. And by the way, that's a weird linguistic tick that people in our line of work have, grow wine. It always reminds me of there's vines in bottles with corks and capsules and labels. They're just growing there on the vine. Right?
Yeah.
But, growing wine implies that, the liquid in the glass is inextricably connected to the vine whose roots are sunk into the land. You're growing your wine. It's not a product that's created in a factory. So that's happening further south in the Southern Hemisphere. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, further north, there's really compelling wines being made in Northern Europe. One of my chapters is on the amazing sparkling wines in England, in southeastern England. So I think that Canada, I wouldn't be surprised if, in the next few years, we hit that inflection point where they become a really important part of wine lists, of retail programs. They're important now for people who know to look for them and the folks who are hand selling them. But I think the quality is just too good for it to remain sort of, if not a secret, then sort of slightly under the radar for much longer. I think there's really good times coming for Canadian wine.
Absolutely. I agree. And there's more and more investment here too from European winemakers who are looking for these new regions as they sort of diversify their own portfolio investment-wise. So
yeah. It's smart money. It's smart money to do that.
Absolutely. All right. So what's your prognosis then for the wine industry? Are you, you've said people in it are optimistic, but what do you foresee in the future as it relates to climate change in wine, 5 years out, 10 years out, longer if you want?
I think that there are going to be certain places that are unfortunately going to have to learn to live with and somehow mitigate the risk of certain natural phenomena which are clearly being driven by climate change. You talk about wildfires in California. Used to be there was a fire season. Now the fire season is more or less all the time, right? It's the question of, will the fires hit after the fruit is in or before the fruit is in, right? I think that certain things like that are going to have to, it's just going to become an expected part, unfortunately, of that vintage cycle year after year. In certain years, there are going to be no fires that are giving you pressure from the smoke and the flames and all that. And those are going to be wonderful years, right? Mm-hmm. Then there are going to be years where it's going to be a problem. So, I think that's a major impact of climate change. I will say also, one of the things that is fascinating to me is the grape varieties that are getting planted in regions that for a long time were associated with one grape or several grapes. That is going to have to shift. And in some places it really has, right? Bordeaux, for example, not all that long ago, they officially allowed the introduction of a handful of other grape varieties in Bordeaux blends. You're not going to find that in Chateau Margaux. That's not legal. But, in your Bordeaux blends, you will find other grape varieties that are maybe a little bit more conducive to these new conditions. Maybe they'll be budding a little bit later, which will stave off a lot of the risk of early spring frosts, right? Because remember, not global warming, global weirding. You'll have other ones, where they're going to have to rethink what grows where. This is a natural marker, let's call it, of wine regions around the world as they mature. What I mean is, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Natalie, is that, newer wine regions, the knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, the market is going to support, people love Cabernet, Merlot, Shiraz, Chard, Sauvignon Blanc. Maybe not taking into account what your microclimate, what your soil is going to make best. And then once a region gets to a place and they have the confidence, they have the know-how and understanding, then they say, maybe Cab isn't our best bet here, but we can make a pretty darn good Tempranillo or a Carmenere or whatever it might be. So this movement to grapes that are not just historically better for a place given its terroir and microclimate, but now as climate change is happening, those discussions, I think, are happening more and more. And maybe before you grew Pinot Noir, and now your average temperatures are getting too warm, maybe it's just getting a little warm for Pinot. Maybe you start experimenting with some more Southern Rhone varieties or whatever it might be. So I think that's going to be forcing some change. But I think that's good, right? I mean, what makes the wine world so interesting,
right? The change
is that
in
none of us,
diversity.
none of us want to drink the same wine all the time. That's why, I love the fact that this 2018 from Shiloh is going to taste different than their 17. It's why this 16 from Kutch is going to taste different than their 15 or 14. There's a sense of interest and excitement and tension there. And I think the world of wine, people are willing to make those changes. So it's not going to be easy. There will be turbulence along the way, as I saw at Ron Yates' estate vineyard with no fruit whatsoever last year. But he was able to make some great wines, just with different fruit. So I think it's going to be fascinating and delicious and occasionally heartbreaking. But I have faith in the future,
Yes.
despite what's happening.
You would have to. Winemaking is like live performance. There's something exciting about watching even a ballet or whatever is your preference because, the dancer might soar or flop on the stage. Wine is like that. It kind of has that live element to it. Like it could be great. It could be really bad.
That's right.
That adds the edge. So for sure.
Yeah, there's beauty in that imperfection.
There is. Yeah. Common humanity as well when you can identify with it. All right. Lightning round because the time is flying here. It's amazing. Great conversation. So if you could pick someone living or dead to have a bottle of wine with, who would it be and why?
Oh, wow. I would say, all right, can I get two answers?
Yes.
Will you give me that?
Of course.
All right, good.
It's a table. You could seat different people around the table.
Oh
if
my
you
gosh.
Want. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess the two people that I know that I would like to have at my table, I would say my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandfather, Charlie, he passed away in 2012. He was this great bon vivant, loved his wine, loved his champagne. And my mom's mom, my grandmother, Gwen, she passed away, I think I was 14 years old, so I was a kid. I would like to open a bottle of wine with them at a table. Now that I am an adult, now that I am in my career, I think that would just be the most amazing conversation with them. And I would want to share all the joy that this world of wine has brought me with two people who were so influential in my life. The other person that I would like to share a bottle of wine with, and, I'm sure we would argue, and I don't even know if we'd get along, but I think like most young people, when I was in university, you're influenced if you want to be a writer and you want to see the world. The first time I read The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, I thought, this guy, right? And of course, there's so many other issues to unpack around Hemingway, right?
But he did like his wine.
He did like his wine, and he was very influential to me. His books were very important to me at a time in my life when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life.
Sure.
I don't think I could keep up with him. I mean, that guy could drink, but I think that would be a really interesting conversation.
Oh, that's great.
And I'd like to have that over a bottle of wine.
Have
maybe
some
a second bottle of
rosado.
wine.
Go watch the bullfights or something.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And if you could put up a billboard in downtown Philadelphia, what would it say?
Fix our potholes, please. It's like
Sure.
parts of Philadelphia, it's like driving on the moon. It's unbelievable. I've had hubcaps come flying off of my car because I hit a pothole that like you could see the southern hemisphere through there. It's unbelievable.
Well, that's practical. I was expecting an inspirational wine message, but why not start with potholes?
All right, I'll tell you what. I'll give you an inspirational wine message.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
Drink something you haven't had before.
Yes.
Right? And if you can drink something you haven't had before, especially with other people who haven't had it before, that's like the recipe for conversation and commentary and argument and all those wonderful things that happen when you share a bottle of wine. So drink outside the box. There's too much out there, right?
Yes.
What do we get? Our 80 years or 80 years, whatever the old biblical thing is, however many years we get on this earth. Why would you drink the same thing all the time? So try something new. Once a month, get a bottle of something you haven't had.
Absolutely. Well, that's a good note
And
to
fix
raise
our
on.
potholes.
Yeah, that's a good toast there. Yeah. So, is there anything we haven't covered, Brian, that you'd like to mention? I'm going to ask you, of course, where we can get your book, but anything else?
Yeah, I would say when you are popping the cork or cracking open, if it's a Stelvin closure from a bottle of wine, think about what went into getting that wine into your glass. And I'm not saying be maudlin and start, we've all seen it in the movies. I like to think about all the people who aren't here anymore when they made that. Okay, fine, right? You want to do that? Great. I'm not drinking with you, but fine. But think about, how amazing it is, right? Like we live in a time where we have access to a wider range of wines from a broader swath of planet Earth more affordably than at any other time in history.
It's true.
Right? So think about how miraculous that is, that you and I are sitting here, Natalie, right? You're in Canada. I'm in Philly. I got a great bottle of wine from Israel, great bottle of wine from Sonoma Coast. You have you have an orange wine and a pet nat from Canada. That's wild that we can do this. So think about how lucky we are to have that and take advantage of it. Think about that sense of camaraderie, of the memories that get made when you do share a glass of wine with someone. And maybe think about how in these very challenging times, these unprecedented times with climate change, how that's affecting this liquid in our glass. Maybe just give it that extra little thought because that matters.
That's great, Brian. Wow. Way to bring it to a close. You must be a writer.
One day.
All right. So where we can get your book, I assume it's on all the major retail sites that you would expect,
Yes.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, all those places.
Wherever books are sold.
Wherever books are sold. Okay, bookstores,
wherever
etc.
books are sold.
Excellent.
You can get the book. Yeah, go online, type in Crushed, How a Changing Climate is Altering the Way We Drink, and it'll pop up.
Yes.
And I hope people take away from the book, what we were just talking about. That
Absolutely.
Things are changing and it's scary, but it is also a time of great innovation and hope.
And I have it here. And just a reminder, you can win one of 3 copies of Crushed, How a Changing Climate is Altering the Way We Drink. And Brian, do you have a website or a way that you connect with people online? Maybe it's a social media channel?
Yes. So, my website is briandfreedman.com, but your best way to get in touch with me is to find me on social media. On Instagram, it is at Freedman Reports. So at Freedman Reports, I think like most of us, Natalie, as a writer, I think one of the most important part of our jobs is procrastinating. Procrastination, it's really easy when you start scrolling on your social media. So send me a message, send me a DM. I will absolutely get back to you. And you'll be helping me procrastinate. So you're doing me a solid.
Help your cause. Okay. We will put links to all of that, your book, your social media, your personal website, Brian. I wish you all the best with this new book that's just out now. Congratulations on writing it and on tackling such an important subject and pouring your heart into it. So cheers. I raise my glass to you.
Thank you. Cheers. It's been an honor talking to you. This has been great. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. All right. Bye for now. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Brian. Here are my takeaways. I love Brian's practical tips for what we can do as wine lovers to help mitigate the impact of climate change. 2, I agree with him that the phrase global warming is a big marketing mistake. Global warming is much better in describing the extreme weather events we're experiencing around the planet. And 3, I found Brian's insights into how climate change is pushing the boundaries of where great wine comes from very fascinating. In the show notes, you'll find my email contact, the full transcript of my conversation with Brian, links to his book and website, the wines we tasted, and where you can find the live stream video version of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. You'll also find a link to my free ultimate guide to wine and food pairing. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclain.com/203. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or would like to be a beta reader of my new memoir at natalie@nataliemclain.com. You won't want to miss next week when I chat with James Atkinson, host of the Australian podcast Drinks Adventures. In the meantime, if you missed episode 9, go back and take a listen. I chat about whether vegan and vegetarian wines are better for you with Ezra Sipes of BC's Summerhill Winery. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
Our vineyard in Kelowna is certified by Demeter as a biodynamic vineyard. It has extra rules above and beyond organic. So organic is sort of the baseline, which means that there's no synthetics being used, basically. And then there's guidance on things they want to see about soil preservation and biodiversity and things like that. But biodynamics really codifies that. You have to have at least 10% of your farm given over to nature habitat. And we have, I think, about 20 or 25% of our farms. That's wetland, we have a dry land, we have a meadow habitat. And then you really view the farm as an ecosystem. You integrate animals and animal manures, and you really focus on making your own fertilizers from things you grow on the farm. We make a horsetail tea for mildew control. We make large amounts of compost, and we add these herbal preparations to the compost to aid processes of decomposition. We spray basically a bacterial broth all over the farm that aids the life force, if you will, in the soil, but basically the soil food web.
If you like this episode, please email or tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wines, tips, and stories we shared. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week, perhaps a wine from an emerging region like England. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemclain.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.